Good evening, everyone, on this delightful Melbourne evening. Welcome all. I'm Nicholas Brash, Director of Melbourne Jewish Book Week. I'd like to start by respectfully acknowledging that the land we are on tonight always was, always will be Indigenous land, and I pay my respects to Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging. Tonight we have a special summer reading guide with Elissa Goldtein, Tali Lavi, and Bram. They'll be making recommendations from books they've read. They'll be revealing books they're most looking forward to reading over the next few months as well. They have quite a list, and we'll be sending that list to all of our subscribers in the coming days, so you don't have to take copious notes. You can just put those pens and pads down and just sit back and enjoy it. If you're not a subscriber to Melbourne Jewish Book Week, just jump on our website and sign up, and you'll get that list and obviously alerts to all our events. It's a very easy thing to do. I'll be back at the end of this with my own recommendation, news of an interview that I know you'll be interested in, and details of upcoming events. So in the meantime, it's over to you, Elissa.
Thanks. Hi. Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to jump straight into it because we've got a lot to discuss tonight, and I've got strict instructions to have us all out by 9. So this is sort of like running a Seder. Anyway, so my first question for you guys, Bram and Tali, is how has your reading been going in 2020? And your writing, if you've been writing.
Bram, I just want to ask you where you're situated right now.
I'm at the Four Seasons. I'm having my conference from the Four Seasons.
Good on you. It's looking swish. So just in regards to your question, Elissa, there were 2 forms of reading I did over this year or these last few months. And that one of them was work related. So I needed to read to review. And so that was great because there were deadlines and I just had to read. And otherwise it started off a bit difficult, I must say. And there's something that I came across these 2 lines in Rebecca Solnit's book, Recollections of My Non-Existence, which I've spoken about before and I really love. And there's just 2 lines. And she writes, "I loved books more than almost anything because I regarded them as a kind of practical enchantment. I wanted to live by books and in books and for books." And to me, I thought not reading this year actually would have meant that we would not have experienced that form of practical enchantment, and we would have been stuck within our confines, within the kind of griefs that so many of us experienced, whether small or large. And it just seemed to me that reading was not just a consolation, it was that form of practical enchantment to me.
Well, it's funny because I had an opposite experience, which, like, for me, particularly the first lockdown, I couldn't read. I couldn't write, couldn't read. I couldn't concentrate on any books. And I know a lot of my kind of book friends and writing friends were having the same experience. I think that you'll find that there's this like dearth of books written in 2020 because all the writers, that there was just this pandemic mental fog almost, or creative fog. It's almost as if the pandemic takes up the same kind of creative space in the brain as you know, thinking about writing and creating. And so, like, in the gap between, I started sort of reading again, and then I've picked up since. I found the best way was actually to start reading novellas. I started reading a lot of novellas, and that just, I was able to concentrate for 100 pages where, you know, I couldn't for 350. And I found that sort of got me back into a flow. And that's really how I got back into like a reading groove, I suppose, which I don't know, like, I even now I'm reading a lot more, but I'm still finding that there is that slight weight that is making it difficult to give myself to books, which for me is very strange. What about you, Elissa? Yeah.
My reading has been pretty crap, if I'm going to be honest. So if there's anyone out there who's sort of felt it's been hard to focus, I'm right with you. Or I should say it's really ebbed and flowed. Like I've had periods where I've read a lot and very attentively, and times where I've just only been able to like doom scroll through Twitter all night before I like sort of fall into a fitful sleep at a very late hour. And, you know, there's that meme that's been, for those of you who are on Twitter or Facebook, on social media, there's this meme that's been circulating lately, like how it started, how it's going. And sometimes it's very earnest. It's like how a relationship began and now the couple's getting married. And I saw one from a writer, which was like how it started. I'm going to write a novel in 2020, and how it's going is I haven't read a book all year, which I really related to. But yeah, I've had ups and downs. And so I thought on that note, one thing that we discussed was like the books that did get us reading when we were really struggling. So I thought on that note, we would begin by talking about the books that have gotten us reading again when we've been struggling. So I'll start with my pick just because I've got the conch. Mine was,
and because Tully's already like snuck one in, but yeah.
Sneaky. There'll be more of that. So mine is The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery. I adored this book. So hang on a second, let me just find, where are my little notes on this one? So this one I heard about because I was on Twitter a lot, as I said, and Rachel Syme, who's one of my favourite writers at The New Yorker and is a really great person to follow on Twitter, often does threads where she gets people talking about what they're reading, what they're watching, the clothes they're buying, like the things that are kind of giving them joy. And this book came up about 3 times in 2020 on a couple of her Twitter threads. And I think of it as like the sexy Anne of Green Gables, which, and I mean, it really is. It's sexy in a very understated way, in a very subtle way, but full of kind of like tension and sensuality. Kind of reminds me a little bit of some Jane Austen novels in that way. It's got this very delicious escapism, very lush descriptions, but also at the same time, the wit and the eviscerating kind of critiques that like Jane Austen has in her fiction. So just to give you a quick synopsis, it's about a 28, 29-year-old woman living in a small town in Canada who is unmarried and therefore over the hill, not much going on in her life. She's kind of bullied by her family and overlooked by them and underestimated by everyone. But she's got a lot going on inside and a lot going on internally and a lot to offer. And without giving too much away, an event is that classic kickstart of a story, kind of a stranger comes to town and she gets some news that is potentially catastrophic for her life, and she decides to upend everything and basically run off and disappoint the expectations of her family, but have a kind of really sexy proto-feminist romp in rural Canada. So I adored that and highly recommend it. Easy reading, great for teenagers through to adults, but it is really a book for adults.
The questions on all of our lips, those of us who love Anne of Green Gables, must be, is the romantic protagonist male, first of all? I won't.
The protagonist of the novel is her love interest. Yes, is a man.
Okay, does he live up to Gilbert Blythe?
He's a dirtbag, Gilbert Blythe.
Gilbert.
Yeah.
Oh no, I thought you were professing Gilbert Blythe to be a dirtbag.
I'm totally reading this.
No. He's like a dirtbag version of Gilbert Blythe. Yeah. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
I'll jump in. For me, it's actually a book that I read in manuscript last year. But then when I couldn't read, I came back to it because it came out in February, March or something. I came back to it a little bit later than that. And that is a book that I talk about a lot because I love ridiculous. I'm sorry for the glare on it. The Slaughterman's Daughter by Yaniv Itzkovich, who is an Israeli writer. And this book is it's a throwback to the great Russian and Yiddish classics, the epics of yesteryear, but it's got this really great, like propulsive, madcap modern kind of plot. It's joyously fun to read. It's such a fun book, but it's still got enough like literary heft, I suppose, to kind of have you feel that you've read something, you know, weighty and of worth. And the story, it's I mean, I can't do justice to the story, but basically it's about a young woman called Fanny Kiesman. She is the daughter of a small village slaughterman. And her sister's husband runs off to the big city, leaving the sister as an aguna, a chained bride. So Fanny decides that she is going to go and find the husband and sort things out. And she enlists the help of her, of like the town eccentric. And they set off on this kind of madcap adventure through the Pale of Settlement. It's set in like, you know, 1800s Pale of Settlement. And very early on, they're jumped by a gang of thieves. And Fanny, because she knows her way around a Shockett's knife, dispatches the thieves. And you know, they leave them kind of dead in the road, and they continue on their quest. But the Tsar's secret police think that there's been some political crime that's been committed. And so you end up with this fantastic cat and mouse chase through the Pale of Settlement by, you know, the Tsar's secret police chasing this slaughterman's daughter and the village eccentric as they go off finding this wayward husband. And it is just, I cannot understate how much I love this book. And it's just one that I literally recommend it to whenever anyone asks me for a book this year. It is hands down my book of 2020. I always just say Slaughterman's Daughter, got to read it.
So has it got quite a modern sensibility to the tone?
Sort of. It's kind of got like there's like a more an undertone, like that keeps it, you know, feeling kind of fresh in that sense. But I mean, it really is like reading a classic, but a funny classic, and a riotously like adventurous classic.
Tali, what was yours?
Okay. This is
Swoon.
the book that got me reading kind of. We might be telling half-truths here, but it was one of the books. Just look at that title. I mean, what are you going through? What are you
2020?
going past me? What was I going through, indeed? But Sigrid Nunez, for those who don't know her, is a bit of a reader's writer and a writer's writer. And those things don't necessarily always overlap. So for those of you who have read her stunningly fine previous novel, The Friend, which was published in 2018, this is a companion piece. And the premise is an old friend basically asks the narrator to be her companion as she prepares to die. If inspirational quotes just irritate you to no end, then Nunez is just your balm. She is super funny. She's nuanced, she's wise, she's acerbic. Her work is still suffused with a sense of compassion, even though there is that acerbic quality to her. And I'm making my way through her substantial back catalogue now, which is brilliant.
I just want to jump in and say The Friend is one of my
the greatest book of the last 10 years.
And I think it's one of the,
oh my God,
one of the best books about grief I've ever read in my life. Possibly the best book about grief I've ever read. Yeah.
And not in a downer way either, in just a really beautifully uplifting way. Yeah.
He's got a very varied tone. There's something just in that voice, and this is the same voice, because I read an article later with an interview with her where she said, this is the same character. We don't know anything other than the voice is exactly the same. So this experience. So in the same way, this deals with grief, with friendships, particularly female friendships, relationships in the wake of Me Too. It's incredibly nuanced on art, on meaning, on books, and all my editions of hers are really dog-eared because you just feel like underscoring every damn line. They're so good.
Yeah. Great
well,
book.
Speaking of underscoring lines, what a segue to the book that we have all read that we're all going to discuss together. So we thought for everyone in the audience, we've all read lots of different books this year, but we thought we'd kind of tied things together with a book that is forthcoming, or is it forthcoming or is it actually out now?
No, it came out this week. It came out last week.
Out this week. Collection of short stories by the great Nicole Krauss, To Be a Man. Speaking of underlining, I mean, I wanted to underline every sentence in this book. And can I just kick it off by sharing what I thought was one of the best opening sentences of a short story that I've read in a very long time. It was, hang on, wait, I've got it in my notes. I won't thumb through the book. It was, do I have it in my notes? I thought I was smart.
Now, we can use this.
While you're looking.
Use that silence to chat amongst yourselves.
Bram and I will guess which of those stories.
Oh, okay. So it's the kind of sentence that you can only write if you grow up with the legacy of the Holocaust in your family and just casually throw in a mention to something Holocaust related when the story doesn't really have anything to do with it. But anyway, I found it. It's the beginning of The Husband, which is the second last story in the book. And it's just a great sentence. On a freezing grey winter ghetto of a day in March, her mother calls to say that the lost husband has arrived. And I just thought that is like, to me, so emblematic of the precision of Nicole Krauss's writing. Like just the addition of the word ghetto in that sentence totally transforms it. It gives you such a strong sense of place. It's so evocative. I mean, on a freezing grey winter day in March just doesn't have the same tenor that it does when you add in ghetto. And I think it's also a sentence that's kind of gets to what a lot of the book is about. Like, this is a book that is very much rooted in the present, but I feel like the weight of history is present throughout. And you feel it, sometimes you feel it intensely, sometimes it's just subtle. It's just like bubbling away under the surface, but you know that it's there and it is informing all of these characters, particularly the characters who I think are sort of auto-fictional and stand-ins for her. Anyway, Bram, you're plutzing to say something.
Look, I'm going to start by saying that The History of Love is one of my favorite books of all time. It's just beautiful, and I will forever love Nicole Krauss for that book alone. The two books that have come since, I've had complicated relationships with. This one, I have to say, I really liked it. I liked it a lot, and I think the thing is, it's like with any short story collection. There are stories that are going to talk to you, and there are stories that are going to speak less to you. And there were some stories in here which I was just like, I was floored. For me, there's a story called The Garden about a gardener in a despotic regime city, and where a kind of horrific crime against humanity has been committed and covered up, and he just goes on gardening, and that story just like destroyed me. It's such a Bram story, like the sort of thing, exactly the sort of thing I love to read. The story that you read the opening line to, The Husband, oh my, it's just beautiful. And then there's a bit of like almost sci-fi stuff in there, as like the future emergencies. It's like, I don't know, it's like
dystopia.
Yeah, dystopian, modern, just slightly future, I suppose. And
it just feels like if things just went slightly more awry, we would be there in 10 years' time.
Yes, that's
and it
exactly.
would be totally realist.
I absolutely would recommend this book. It's a great book, even if I didn't love all the stories. But that's the beauty of a story collection. And the other thing that's really interesting, she's spoken a lot about how this is about being a man, like and being understanding men and being in the person of a man and all that. And I weirdly, the ones that did that more were the ones that didn't really speak to me. And I know the last story, which is a story you both love, and you're like, like you'll just both melt as I mention it. It just, I don't know.
Cool. Can I just want to say, Tali, I want to let you speak, but I want to say something directly in response to that, Bram. I don't think that this is so much a book about what it is to be a man as it is a book about what it means to be a woman who understands men and who is getting to understand men better as she gets older, which is so much more interesting to me as a reader. And I think that's why for me and Tali, this last story, which I think is quite auto-fictional,
very
based a lot on her personal life, and very raw and very much about being a mother and romance and sex and divorce is so resonant. But anyway, Tali, I'll let you.
So I wanted to speak about what you referred to before, Elissa, and that was the sense of it being very much about the past and yet also located in the present. I also thought that a lot of the stories I really loved, there was some kind of underpinning to it that looked to the future. And maybe that also connects to what you're saying, Bram, because she's trying to understand not only her relationships with men, but, and it's not purely autofictional. I don't want to make that claim for it because it really isn't. But I think she wants to almost imagine a space through which her two sons can move, because she doesn't see it enough in wider society. And it's almost like a year of positive thinking or something. She's wishing this to be the case where there can be so many permutations. And I think there is obviously space for that. But if you look at America, at the, contemporary America, the role models wouldn't be hugely,
inspiring.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going to go politics, but I just want to also say that I think she does lots of different things in these essays because they haven't been written for just the sake of this collection. They've been written along the way. I have a feeling that a couple of them, the later ones, were written for this collection. But there's this beautiful essay called,
Stories.
Story. It's not an essay. It's really not an essay. And it's called Seeing Ershadi.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
Oh.
Great story.
It is so beautiful. And it's about Hamayun Ershadi, who is the actor who stars in Abbas Kiarostami's Taste of Cherry, which is the Iranian great filmmaker, and he's a great Iranian actor. And it kind of looks at not only identification, but how readers or viewers of artwork bring something kind of labile or something that can be quite protean to an artwork, how it can change. It can change either through their reading or through their subsequent readings. So I really loved that.
It was a great story.
To me about what we take from art.
Yeah. Look, I have to say, like, overall, this to me this is my second favorite Nicole Krauss book, right? Like, and that's like saying something. I think it's almost like it was time for her to do a collection of stories. Like, I like bite-sized Nicole Krauss. And it's particularly at the moment when reading and concentrating and committing to a longer book is difficult, like having the beauty of what she writes in these like digestible chunks, and each one, even the ones that didn't like appeal as much to me, I still saw great quality and great beauty in.
I found there was some stories where the structure wasn't always so successful. Like sometimes endings happened abruptly, or there were twists that filled with a lot of emotion that I wasn't sure if the story had earned it. But despite my minor quibbles from like a literary criticism point of view, I still loved it. Like even when the stories, I thought there were a few that weren't so strong, her writing is so good, her sentences are so good, like the language and the metaphor is so original and beautiful that she can get away with not having a perfect ending,
Yeah.
I think it's really something else about her is that she is such an intensely Jewish writer.
Yes,
There aren't many writers that you can say, someone's Jewish, but they don't necessarily, it doesn't feed into everything that they write. And even when she's writing a modern kind of Jewish existence, she still has, I think it's the weight of history and story. It kind of pervades everything she writes because she knows so much.
And it's also very we should probably move on to the next thing, but it's also very like on that note, she's so rooted in like Jewish diaspora and not just American Judaism. Like there will be characters who have a parent who is Jewish, who was born in Europe, grandparents who are Holocaust survivors, or a parent who is American. Often when I read American Jewish fiction, which I love, it feels very American to me, and I feel like a real outsider reading it and observing it. But I feel like such an insider with her books, because I feel like it's my family's history in a way that is being presented, but just in an American context, you know? Like I have a parent born in Europe. So that all resonates. Yeah.
There's also just an intimacy that draws you in, kind of irrespective of where you're kind of geographically situated, but like there's just something so inviting about how she writes and what she writes, that it's sort of I'm totally with you on that, Elissa. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And all right, we should, Tali, one final word.
I think we should just make a note of the fact, special announcement.
Oh, yes. Tali, do you want to make the special announcement?
Okay.
Make it quick.
Well, Melbourne Jewish Book Week are delighted. We are thrilled to announce that we will be presenting you with a conversation with Nicole Krauss in
28th of January.
28th of January.
28th, that's it. Don't miss it.
Yeah.
Mark your calendar and read the book, because there may be an opportunity to submit a question if you have one. All
right.
Cool. All right.
So, moving on.
Next category. We're moving on to our non-fiction picks. Bram, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. I'll make it reasonably quick. So my non-fiction pick is the book that just won the Sammy Raw Prize at the, which is like the big Jewish book prize in America. It's a book called Kafka's Last Trial, The Case of a Literary Legacy by Benjamin Ballant. And it's, I think, everyone knows the great story of Kafka having asked his literary executor, Max Brod, to destroy his papers upon his death, and Max Brod didn't do it, and he ended up publishing a lot of the books that made Kafka the name that he is today. But there was also a suitcase of unpublished work that Brod took with him to Israel when he fled there in 1939 from Prague. And this book was, when he died, so this suitcase, when it was kind of left just in his his home. It's actually in Nicole Krauss's last book, funnily enough. But it just sat there, and then when he died, it was left to his secretary, who was Esther Hoffer. I think Esther was the mother. And basically, the cats used to sit on it, and they used to, do their business on it. So it's like this, kind of wee-stained manuscripts and all this. Anyway, a big fight ended up happening between the German government and the Israeli government over who owned these papers, essentially. And this book is like an investigation into that case. And it reads partly like a courtroom drama, partly like a literary and cultural history, part a meditation on kind of the ownership of art. What is it? Who owns art? It's accessible, it's engaging, it's enthralling. It's a really great book about a really interesting episode in world literary history, and I absolutely recommend it.
Tali, you want to go next?
Okay. I've got The Wolf of Baghdad. I'm sorry, is it reflecting? Which is subtitled Memoir of a Lost Homeland. It's by Carol Isaacs. It was published this year by Myriad Editions. Carol Isaacs is a musician and a really well-regarded cartoonist whose work appears in several publications, including The New Yorker, under the pseudonym The Surreal McCoy. She was born in England to a Jewish Iraqi family, and she professes to have lived in two worlds whilst growing up. There was the world of her birthplace and the world of the lost world of her Iraqi family's roots. This is a graphic novel, which is pastiche. It incorporates drawn representations of photos from her family and documents and oral testimonies. And the narrative device she uses is one where a modern day woman in London, who is Carol Isaacs herself, guides us through this kind of mechanism of a dream through a reconstructed Baghdad, where there's an 150,000 strong Jewish community, which is thriving. It's a ghostly resuscitation as she meets family members, in their youth who are no longer alive. Now, accompanying it through it all, through the streets of Baghdad, is this figure of a wolf who is both a haunting and consoling presence, and it's actually a symbol of good luck. It's really, the whole story is pervaded by a spirit of homesickness, the type that the Finnish refer to as kaikaipo. I didn't say that at all. It's kaikokaipo. Yeah, there you go.
Finnish is remarkable.
For a place that you've never been. So there's this sense of nostalgia. And what's really striking about this book, other than it being a superb portrait of place and community, is that the figure of Carol Isaacs is wearing an abaya, as her grandmother did when venturing outdoors. I'm going to show you if you can see it at all. I don't know if you can see that properly. And because her grandmother did so. And so on one level, this subverts the notion of the outsider or challenges what we see at veiled Islamic women when we see them as outsiders. And it also examines what might happen when a community is othered. And it was published this year in an increasingly racist, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic Britain. And so it feels like a really significant book. Along with an enjoyable one. And it really complements also what I had already encountered in Marina Benjamin's really fine family memoir, Last Days of in Babylon.
Sneaking in another one. Well done.
All right, I'll jump into mine, which this one I read on my Kindle, but I've downloaded the cover so you can see it. Guys. Culture Warlords by Tali Lavi's American doppelganger by name. I loved this book. It is not an easy read. So Talia Lavin, she's a young journalist who lives in Brooklyn, Jewish, in her, I think, early to mid 30s, basically decided to immerse herself in the world of the alt-right and white supremacists on the internet. So it has a really intense kind of gonzo vibe, but also at the same time, this is a book that was written mostly online. So she's really immersing herself every day in these kind of like 8chan chat groups and like, I don't know, it's like, it's not WhatsApp, but it's like the deep web version of WhatsApp where they're all sharing their like anti-Semitic memes. She assumes various online identities to explore this topic. So she pretends to be an incel, an involuntary celibate, which is, you know, less about how much sex you're having and more about having a worldview that is tainted by misogyny and conspiracy theories. She pretends to be a factory worker. She pretends to be a blonde female white supremacist on a dating site. And the content is disturbing, but it's also very easy to read. She's a great writer. The descriptions are really vivid. She's funny, and she manages to kind of make, like, there are some very dark lulls as you're reading this book that is extremely disturbing. It's very readable. She's a very passionate narrator, but at the same time, she's measured and she's self-aware. So you really get a sense, she's very much a character in this non-fiction reported book. You really get a sense of who she is. And I'll just tell you how she describes herself. She says in the introduction, "In real life, I'm a schlubby bisexual Jew living in Brooklyn with long brown ratty curls, the matronly figure of a mother in a Philip Roth novel, and brassy personal politics that aren't particularly sectarian but fall considerably to the left of Medicare for all. Over the course of writing this book, I had to leave my own skin, and sometimes what I found made me want to never return to it." She's also like from a family of Holocaust survivors, so very much infused with that perspective. And it was a great read, and it's essential to understanding America in 2020 and going forward. Just because Trump lost the election doesn't mean that that world is going anywhere. So yeah, really recommend reading that if you want to get a sense of that whole world.
It's being really, really well received. And it also, from your description, it really reminds me of, I don't know if anyone's read Them by John Ronson, where he he basically did the same thing, looking into like maybe 20 years ago now, looking at all the great conspiracies and involving himself in the proponents of them. And this sort of thing, like I'm also incredibly drawn to that. And it's a very, I mean, if done well, it's frightening, but it's actually like, it's almost essential reading, like to get a sense of what really is going on in the world.
Totally. And she talks a lot about like the experience of being immersed in that and how kind of disturbing it can feel, and how the anger that she encounters online kind of seeps into her, and how it changes her psyche over the course of the year of writing the book. And I think it's also really interesting to read this from a woman's perspective, because the abuse that she experiences in her real life as a journalist who's identified as Jewish online is very sexist and very much about her body in a way that I think men don't experience. And even as a journalist, she has a kind of she's got a lot of brashness, but not as much arrogance as some male journalists do when they approach this kind of topic and this kind of style. So, it was just like a really nice kind of change to be immersed in that, but from a woman's point of view, even though at the same time, it's quite disturbing. Kind of felt like I needed a whiskey every time I sat down to read a chapter.
So can I just also point out, I'm just seeing that there are quite a few comments where people are saying that they're missing the titles of some of the books sometimes. And just to say, not to worry, we are going to be sending out a list of all of them on the MailChimp after tonight.
Yeah. And we should repeat them at the end. So that was Cultural Warlords by Tali Lavi.
And she is very funny.
She is very funny.
But she's great on Twitter. Like, just
audacious.
Yeah, chutzpah, like real chutzpah.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Let's move on to the next category, which is fiction.
Okay.
Bram, do you want to go first?
Okay. I was going to say Tali could go first on this one, but I will go first and say, okay, so mine is At Night's End by Nir Bram. And a lot of people watching may remember Nir, who was a guest a few years ago at Melbourne Jewish Book Week. And it's interesting, his first book when he came here was this book, Good People, which was set during the war. And interestingly, relative to now, explore the idea of what people are like on both sides. And then since then, he's published an incredible work of reportage called A Land Without Borders. And now this is his second novel to be translated into English. Nir's a really exciting writer because everything he writes is substantially different, but always incredible, quality. And this is a really beautiful, intensely personal book that's drawn from his own life. And it tells the story of a writer called Jonathan, who wakes up in a hotel room in an unfamiliar city. He's in a dreadful state, completely disheveled. And he begins kind of putting the pieces together of what's going on. He's in Mexico City for a literary festival. And he begins to realize that his confusion seems to center around this obsessive thought that he has that his best friend from childhood, a guy called Yoel, is in danger. And what follows this kind of dreamlike return to episodes from his childhood, from his younger days, where he pieces together a number of the kind of key moments in their friendships, recasting them with adult eyes, set against, and these kind of episodes are set against Jonathan's attempts to kind of just pull himself together. And you kind of get the sense as the book progresses that he's actually grieving as well. Now, this book is inspired by the suicide of one of Nir's best friends. And it's an incredibly moving, incredibly affecting novel, which asks some really, really tough questions about memory and the nature of friendship over time. It's an incredible book, one of the most powerful books I've read in a long time. And I strongly recommend it. It's not an easy book, but it's one that you'll find incredibly rewarding and incredibly thought-provoking. You'll get a lot out of it. So that is Nir Bram, At Night's End, published by Text.
Yeah, I know what I'm buying next, or that the list gets that much longer, doesn't it? Can I speak about Speedboat? So Speedboat is by Renata Adler. I have to admit that I'd heard it mentioned before. It is a bit of a cult classic, but it largely passed me by. except that it was mentioned by one of the committee members of Melbourne Jewish Book Week, who happens to just share the first name of the writer. So just to contextualise, Renata Adler was born in Milan in 1938 to German Jewish parents, but she's an American writer and novelist, and she was book critic for the New Yorker, who also reported on the civil rights movement, and she was actually the chief film critic for the New York Times in 1968 to 1969. In other words, she was uber cool and was even photographed by Richard Avedon. So Speedboat, published in 1976, is a modernist classic. It's not your average linear storytelling. The narrator, Jen Fain, is a 30-something journalist who writes for a tabloid. It's episodic, fragmentary. It feels like it contains the spirit of America of the times and yet still refuses to define it. Jen's voice is stunningly good. It's tart, it's cool, it's observational, it's whip smart. It's funny, but it's not caustic. And I just want to mention, because it feels like it's free form, but then you realize that it's actually extremely carefully constructed. There's a peripatetic movement like a speedboat. And I'd love to give an example of what she achieves in 2 pages towards the beginning. I'm not going to read the 2 pages, don't worry. But the first passage, Jen is sitting in Elaine's, which is a New York restaurant, which was a real institution, maybe made infamous now by being the place where Woody Allen and Mia Farrow first met. Jen describes the young women who are there on dates with young men, and those men end up talking to each other, and they're real cads. They're wealthy, but refusing to pick up the check. Like every night, none of them are willing to take responsibility. And then the next passage, we shift to this bite-sized but extremely affecting and funny story about the man she's with on a date, Michael, and his experience of being fat as a child. And then we move to this passage, and I'm just going to read out this paragraph. We have all, of course, had childhoods. I do find that the person with the clearest, least self-serving simply pays. I remembered another Matthew, an unpleasant child. He came from many miles away to our place, where there was a lake with fish. Matthew never caught one. We went trolling from a rowboat, casting from the shore. Sometimes we used a bamboo pole and worms. We all caught fish but Matthew. He talked. We rode him. Nothing happened. At first, it was a triumph. Then we were embarrassed. Finally, my brothers had a thought. My older brother said that the secret of fishing in the lake was paper bags. Matthew said, oh, as though he had actually always known it. I rode. My brothers put half a worm on Matthew's hook, around that a paper bag with a fish concealed inside. In a few minutes, Matthew said he thought he had a bite. He reeled in. He was ecstatic with his half-dead perch. We never told him. Last year, I saw that Matthew with his children running for office in Chicago. He spoke of his boyhood, fishing, and of that afternoon when he caught that grand pike casting. No harm in it. Lucky memory on his part. On my brother's, picking up the check. See how she does that? It's just breathtaking.
Very clever. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Elissa, what are you recommending?
So this book blew me away. Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. This is another one that there was a lot of hype about on Twitter, and that always intrigues me and piques my interest. And sometimes the hype is deserved and sometimes it isn't. In this case, deserved. So this is, I don't even know how to begin to describe it. It is social satire meets catastrophic end of world scenario set in like the Hamptons in the summer, in the present, basically. So it's really a book that speaks to the experience of being alive and living in a city like New York in 2020. It is very accomplished, very kind of very, very accomplished, very satirical, very brilliantly written, not super heavy, and just engaging and compelling, because underlying it all is this thriller. Essentially, what has happened in this story is a middle-class white family from Brooklyn have gone on a holiday. They booked a holiday house in the Hamptons in the summer, as you do, 2 parents and like 2 teenage children. And a couple of days into their stay, something very mysterious and catastrophic begins to unfold in the city. We don't know what it is. I'm not going to reveal anything about it. You just need to know that that is the premise. And the couple, an older wealthy Black couple, who are the people that own this house that they're renting, turn up because they're seeking refuge. And it is about what happens between these 2 families that are reliant on each other and who are on the one hand, similar social milieus, but also very, very different. It's actually, there was a really good review of it in The Guardian by Alex Preston the other day. And it was described this way, which I think is so apt: with echoes of Jordan Peele's Get Out and Cormac McCarthy's The Road, this superb end-of-the-world novel captures the generalised panic of 2020, which I just think is so brilliant way of describing the year that we've all had. So yeah, it's dark and it's scary, and there is this sense of foreboding doom as you're reading. Like, I often had sweaty hands. I was just like, what is going to happen next? But it's also suffused with these moments of wry humour that really nail the milieu of this white family. Reminded me quite a bit of, at points, just A Fleischman is in Trouble, like the humour of Taffy Brodesser Akner, so acerbic, so on point about the signifiers of like wealth and being middle class and living in like Brooklyn or Manhattan. And also, in another way, it kind of reminded me of Ben Lerner, who's another contemporary American writer that I love, who also really nails very specific kind of social groups. And yeah, it's an extraordinary book because he wrote it before coronavirus happened, before anything that happened. I mean, obviously this was a finished manuscript probably well over a year ago, but it is, to me, the book that just most speaks to the experience of 2020. I mean, it has a lot of resonance for me because I lived in New York, so I very much know the world that he's talking about. But even if you haven't, it's still a great read. And it's weirdly a great summer read, even though it's very scary. So yeah, lots of hype. Leave the World Behind, Rumaan Alam. Highly recommend it. Anyway, we should move on to our next category. We've got a couple more things that we're going to talk about before we wrap up. We're going to do a little flash section where we're not going to talk about the books. We're just going to hold up 3 random books that didn't fit into another category that we want to recommend. No discussion allowed because you don't have time. Not really. Maybe a very quick synopsis.
Quick synopsis.
Tali, sorry?
Quick synopsis.
Very, very quick. Tali, do you want to go first?
Okay. Quick synopsis. Number 1, the autobiography of my mother by Jamaica Kincaid, written in 1996. Just the first sentence: my mother died at the moment I was born, and so for my whole life there was nothing standing between myself and eternity. At my back was always a bleak black wind. Jamaica Kincaid also was born in Antigua. She happened to convert to Judaism at some point in her life. And it is very much about the corrosive effects of colonialism on an individual and society, but also this really almost violent viscerality. It's just extraordinary. Okay, book 2, Wild Milk by Sabrina Oramark. This is only for the experimental reader. She is a poet. She weaves Jewish fairy tale with kind of themes of the weight of family and history. And it is really, it's surreal, it's intense, it's shimmering. It's one for those who are not scared of something where you're not quite sure what's going on. Ali Smith, Summer. Sorry, I didn't just sing, did I? Summer.
No, you didn't.
I love her.
Summer is Ali Smith's, the last of her incandescent seasonal quartet. Begin with autumn, progress through them. They've marked my last 4 reading years. She's one of the most glorious writers I know. She shifts our ideas of what novels can do and can be. And Daniel Gluck is one of the most memorable Jewish characters. I adore him and Ali Smith, and I won't go on, but I could for another session alone on Ali. Over to you.
Elissa?
Oh, me. All right, I'll go. Okay, so my quick 3. Elena Ferrante, The Lying Life of Adults. She needs no introduction. You know the deal. It's set in Naples. It's gritty. It's internal. It's about emerging from girlhood into womanhood. It's just all the stuff that she's amazing at, and it's really good. So if you liked My Beautiful, My Brilliant Friend and that quartet, you will love this. The other is a cookbook. I just want to give a shout out. This is In Rage of Veg by Alice Savslasky, a fellow Yavna graduate. We did debating together. Hi, Alice, if you're out there listening, you might be. This is so, so great. It is a massive tome. Look at that. It is gorgeous and colourful. She's a joy to read. She writes about food so beautifully. There's all of these, it's all vegetables. So, it's great for the Jews. It's all kosher. And yeah, it's a fun, colourful, summery read. So yeah, it's lovely to read cookbooks that you want to read as works of literature about food as well. And then my last one is, let me grab a photo if I've got the cover. I do. This is not really working.
There we go.
Zipporah. It is a short story, a long short story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who wrote Americana, which I loved, and Half of the Yellow Sun, and some great short stories. It's only on Amazon, but you don't need to have a Kindle. You can download the Amazon app to your phone and read it that way. And it's a great short story about a woman, a Nigerian woman, living in the United States. It's about diaspora, motherhood, childbirth, labor, all those juicy things.
All right, so quickly, sometimes you come across the right book at the right time. And for me, as a book to counter the sense of alienation and loneliness that this pandemic brought about, Fracture by Andres Newman. Wow, this book is just stunning. One of the most beautiful things I've ever read, actually. It centers around a hibakusha, which is a survivor of both atomic bombs, who sets off on a pilgrimage of sorts to bear witness to the aftermath of the Fukushima disaster. It's deeply profound. It's lyrical. It's astounding. I was just jotting down quotes everywhere and posting them on Twitter. I went on like a Twitter quote rampage of Andres Newman. It's just amazing. I was in awe. If you really just want a stunning, beautiful book, this is it. Secondly, slightly changing the tone here, the most hilarious biting satire that I've read of institutionalized racism in America. It's called Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. It's just recently been shortlisted for the National Book Award. I've been a huge fan of Charles Yu for ages. He's just incredibly funny, incredibly smart, but this book is next level. And it's the story of Willis Wu, who's a bit part actor in Hollywood, dreaming of working his way up the ladder from, Asian man in grocery store or Asian shopkeeper or dead Asian man 3 to the apex kung fu hero. It's so brilliantly done. It's so funny, but it also really gets to the heart of some really massive societal issues, which are all the more pressing at the moment. And finally, this gorgeous book, Late Sonata by Brian Wolpert. It recently won this year's Viva la Novella Prize, which is one of my favorite Australian literary prizes. Short book, beautiful, delicate, packs a huge emotional punch. It's about a husband who's editing his wife's final manuscript. She's an author who is succumbing to the last stages of Alzheimer's. He's also working on his own novel about an experimental treatment that reverses aging. Anyway, as he goes through her papers, he uncovers evidence of an affair she had many years ago. It's so great. It's so perfectly balanced. It says really great things about love, about memory, about family, about art. It is a masterpiece in miniature. Late Sonata by Brian Wolpert. Absolutely fantastic.
Well done. So we're on to just the last category, which is books that are coming out that we have not read, but we're really looking forward to reading. We'll also have to do this pretty quickly, so consider this also a bit of a speed round. Tali, you want to go first?
Get off mute. Yeah.
My book is Anna Mcdonald's. I don't know if you can see it, A Jealous Tide. I've admired Anna's critical writing for some time now. She's released a book of essays last year. I know her as one of the loveliest and most brilliant booksellers ever. She works at Paperback Bookshop, and you can buy it there amongst other books and other bookstores. And it is, I've just read the first chapter. Its prose is lucent, it's distilled, it conveys movement, wanderlust, the physical world. It's like a beautifully played violin. And I would just say, that Charlie Kaufman's Ant Kind, will I really read it? I hope so. It's it's rather large, but I did listen to an interview where he said that basically it was a film he could never actually get made because it's so fantastical. So I thought that's brilliant. Same writer as Adaptation and Being John Malkovich. Okay, over to you.
Bram?
Oh, okay. So quickly, for me, if someone said, write a book for Bram, this would be it. It's called The Lost Shtetl by Max Gross. And it is, it's basically the story of a shtetl that has been left untouched right through the modern times, and that suddenly gets discovered. It's like, those Amazonian tribes that's, occasionally get found in there, but this is a shtetl in Poland. It's meant to be hilarious. It's meant to be, everything I want in a summer read. And just the first line killed me. Even in a happy, peaceful town such as ours, it is possible to find someone you never want to see again. I just thought, what brilliant. That's got me already. So The Lost Shtetl by Max Gross. Reviews have been amazing. Everyone's raving about it who has read it. Just came out. Also, one of the most beautiful covers I've seen in a very long time. So yeah, I cannot wait to read this.
It's being released next year in Australia, though.
Yeah.
Get it shipped in.
So I've got two that I'm just going to mention really quickly. The first one is, you probably have heard of Stacy Abrams, who is a lawyer, a politician. She served in the Georgia House of Reps, and she also founded Fair Fight Action, which is an organisation that addresses voter suppression, which has a lot to do with why Georgia flipped in the recent US election. But this is not about her politics. She is also a really brilliant writer of genre fiction. She writes romance novels, and she has a political thriller coming out next year. I'm not really into romance, but I am into political thrillers. So I'm going to be reading While Justice Sleeps by Stacy Abrams. And the other book that I just want to mention quickly, which I have waiting for me at the Avenue, is Where the Fruit Falls by Karen Wilde, which is a multi-generational story set in the 60s and 70s about Aboriginal rights. And it is a new Australian epic, and it's NIDOC week. So got to mention some really brilliant new literature that addresses the Aboriginal experience. And that's it.
Wait, I'm giving my second one because you both got two. The other one, 3 by D.A. Mashani, and another thriller by him. He was a guest of ours at last festival, at the last Melbourne Jewish Book Week. D.A. Mashani, 3, meant to be his best so far, so cannot wait to read that. That's it. No.
The Seder has concluded. Lashana Haba. We'll hand it over to Nicholas.
Thank you. Oh my God, guys, that was wonderful. That was so much fun. Yeah, there was so much chemistry. It's almost as if you know each other. It was just absolutely wonderful. So many recommendations. Thank you so much. Not only have you provided us with plenty of food for thought with these great books, but I must commend you for doing such a great job of keeping our beloved bookshops in business. You not only will our people go out and buy these books now, but you guys must rack up an absolute personal sponsorship from Readings and the Avenue and Jeffries and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you. Don't forget, everybody watching, all subscribers to Melbourne Jewish Book Week, we will give you a list of all the books discussed tonight. So if you want that, please go and subscribe, and then you'll be kept informed of everything. I just wanted to mention one. I was only going to mention one book, but then somebody in the Q&A said, has anyone mentioned or read a Perigon? That was my favorite book of the year. So anyone who hasn't read it, go off and read that. And also, if you didn't know, we did have the absolute pleasure of interviewing Colin McCann earlier in the year, and that interview's up on our website. So go and have a look at that. But the book I wanted to mention, and I was going to hold it up, and I had 2 copies of it, and I realised I've lent both of them to people, and I only realised it 5 minutes before we started, so I didn't have a time to do what Elissa did, and they, you know, brilliantly print out a copy of the cover. But it's Alex Miller's Max. I adore Alex Miller. He's a literary legend, and this is his book. It's his first non-fiction book. It's about his great friend Max Blatt, a German Polish Jew, a socialist, a resistance fighter, who became an exile in Australia and became Alex's best friends. And as a bonus for Melbourne Jewish Book Week supporters, I was lucky enough to do an interview with Alex a week ago, and it is now on our website as of this moment. So, so if not tonight, if you haven't had enough tonight, go and watch it straight away. But if not tonight, in the next few days, I urge you to watch it. Alex is a very generous interviewee and a literary legend in Australia. And there's so much in this book about the search for Jewish identity, not his obviously, but Max, and about Max's life. And he goes, Alex goes to Poland, he goes to Germany, he goes to Israel. It's just a wonderful book. This is the last second Tuesday of the month live event until next February, but don't leave us quite yet, because I just want to let you know we've been working very hard behind the scenes to keep the goodies coming to you. So even though we don't have a live event in December, on the second Tuesday of December, we're going to be releasing 6 interviews in our new book chat series. These are interviews with authors who are due to be part of our in-person festival in May. That's only 5 months ago, guys. It seems like 5 years ago, doesn't it? That would have been on. Anyway, and we're releasing another 6 of them on the second Tuesday in January. So you'll have 12, and they're condensed. They're not a full hour. They range in from sort of 15 minutes to about 45 minutes. And interviewees include Andrea Goldsmith, Ginger Gorman, Dennis Altman, Philip Salem, Anna Epstein. Wonderful. And we're going to keep that series going next year with more interviews. As mentioned earlier, we're going to be launching our 2021 season on Thursday, 28th of January, with an interview with Nicole Krauss, which we're very excited about. Well, I'm very excited about, but not half as excited as some other people are about it. On the second Tuesday of February, which will be just after that, obviously, a couple of weeks after that, we're having another book club event with Arnold Zabel, talking about his latest book, The Watermill. So there's just another book for your list to read over summer. Just one more heads up I want to give you. For those of you who write, not necessarily professionally, but those who dabble in writing, I just want to give you a heads up. Our April event next year is an open mic event. It's going to give any of you the opportunity to read a short piece of work to our audience. I know that might sound daunting, and I'll give you more details about it, but it will be a very a warm, welcoming environment. It can be fiction, non-fiction, memoir, even a poem. And I'm just telling you about that now so that you can actually start crafting a piece if you wish. But obviously there'll be a lot more information about that event next year. Finally, as you can see, we're doing everything that we can to enrich your lives. So with that in mind, I encourage you to make a donation to the Melbourne Jewish Book Week so we can continue to bring you such events. And we have some amazing ones lined up already for next year. Details of how to donate will follow in about 30 seconds. I just want to end by thanking you all for your support this year. It's been a very difficult year. And it's certainly not the year we intended to have, but I've been delighted by the way that everybody has come together to create all these wonderful events. But most importantly, you guys have supported us in great numbers. The number of people that are coming to our events and sticking by them. I noticed tonight, not a single person left our event tonight. A couple arrived late, but I just assumed they were Bram's friends who had just got out of bed. But thank you so much. We're getting great numbers and great support. We really value and appreciate it. And although we've got other events coming up, there's no more live events for this year. So I just want to end by just saying keep well and keep safe, and shalom. Good night.